He served his country, his dog served him. But when a simple ramp for his disabled canine hero became an eyesore for one HOA member, a quiet suburban street became a battleground. You won't believe the callous cruelty that ignited a veteran's righteous fury. Don't miss what happens next when one man and his dog stand against injustice. The splintered wood was the first thing David Martinez saw, an ugly, jagged scar across the neat green of his Sacramento front lawn. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in late May 2017, the California sun already promising another warm day. But the sight of the demolished ramp sent a chill colder than any winter morning through David's 44-year-old frame. His ramp, Rex's ramp, gone. Not just gone, obliterated, smashed with a violence that spoke of malice, not accidental damage. "What in the—" David muttered, his voice a low growl that rumbled deep in his chest, a familiar echo from his years in the Marines. He limped forward, each step a painful reminder of the IED that had reshaped his life and ended his career. Beside him, Rex, his 9-year-old German Shepherd service dog, whined softly, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on the wreckage, then up at David, sensing the storm brewing in his human. Rex wasn't just a pet. He was an extension of David, a lifeline. The dog, officially recognized and once even honored by Governor Emily Brooks for his service to a veteran, helped David navigate not only the physical pain that gnawed at his left leg, but also the invisible labyrinth of PTSD. Lately, Rex himself had been slowing down, a touch of arthritis in his hips making the 3 steps up to the porch a daily challenge. The ramp, a simple wooden structure David had spent 2 weekends meticulously building, had been their shared solution, a small monument to mutual support. It had only been completed 3 days ago. He knelt, ignoring the protest from his knee, and picked up a piece of splintered pine, clean cuts on some pieces, brutal, jagged breaks on others. This wasn't the work of vandals or teenagers. This was targeted, deliberated. A movement caught his eye. Across the street, tending to her unnaturally perfect rose bushes, was Sharon Lee, 62, impeccably dressed even for gardening. Sharon was the self-appointed guardian of the Willow Creek Estates Home Owners Association's covenants, conditions and restrictions, and, David suspected, the architect of this destruction. He straightened, the piece of wood still clenched in his fist. Rex stayed close, a warm, reassuring pressure against his leg. David limped across the street, his gait uneven but his purpose firm. "Morning, Sharon," David said, his voice deceptively calm. Sharon Lee looked up, her lips pursed into a small, disapproving O as she took in David's disheveled appearance. He'd barely had time for coffee, let alone his usual morning routine. "David," she acknowledged, her tone clipped. "You're up early? And your dog is on my sidewalk." She eyed Rex as if he were a stray coyote. "My ramp, Sharon, it's gone, smashed to pieces." She snipped a perfectly formed rosebud with an air of serene detachment. "Oh, that, yes, the association had it removed. It was an unapproved alteration. David, an eyesore, frankly, completely out of keeping with the neighborhood's aesthetic standards." David's jaw tightened. An eyesore. It was a ramp. Sharon, for my service dog, and for me. "You know I have trouble with stairs. We have rules for a reason," she said, turning her cool gaze on him. Section 4, subsection B, clearly states all external modifications require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You submitted no such application. I built a ramp, not a bloody extension. Rex is a certified service animal. He needs it. I need it. It's about accessibility, not aesthetics. David could feel the anger, hot and familiar, coiling in his stomach. He fought to keep it leashed, just as Rex sat patiently, leashed by his side. Service animal or not, Sharon sniffed. The structure was non-compliant and, quite frankly, unsightly. It lowered the tone. We received several complaints. Complaints. It was up for 3 days. Who complained? You, David's voice was rising. and he saw a flicker of something, triumph, in Sharon's eyes. He forced himself to take a breath and removed Sharon. It was destroyed, vandalized. The removal company might have encountered some difficulties with the substandard construction, she said, waving a dismissive hand. Not the HOA's concern. The point is, it's gone, as it should be. You'll also be receiving a formal notice of violation and a fine for the unapproved structure. David stared at her, dumbfounded by the sheer audacity, the cold-hearted dismissal of his and Rex's needs. Substandard construction. He'd built that ramp to be sturdy, safe. He'd used treated lumber, reinforced supports. It was better built than half the cosmetic add-ons she'd approved for other houses. This isn't over. Sharon, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This is a violation of the the Fair Housing Act. Rex is not a pet, he's a medical necessity. That ramp was a reasonable accommodation. Sharon Lee actually smirked. Oh, I don't think you'll find the HOA in violation of anything. David, we are merely upholding the standards that maintain our property values. Perhaps you should have considered that before moving into a covenanted community. Or perhaps, she added, her voice dripping with condescension, a different living arrangement would be more suitable for your circumstances. The implication hung heavy in the morning air. You and your disabled dog don't belong here. David felt Rex shift beside him, a low growl vibrating in the dog's chest, mirroring David's own suppressed rage. He placed a hand on Rex's head. Easy, boy. He turned back to Sharon, his eyes like chips of granite. You've made a mistake, Sharon. A big one. He turned and limped back toward his own yard, the image of the splintered wood burning in his mind. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and the unwavering bond between a veteran and his service dog. Sharon Lee had declared war, and David Martinez, former Marine, knew how to fight. He just needed to pick his battlefield. The first step, he knew, would be gathering his evidence photos of the demolished ramp, Rex's certifications, his own VA disability paperwork. And then he'd find out exactly who on the HOA board had sanctioned this act of callous destruction. He had a feeling Sharon Lee wasn't acting entirely alone, but she was certainly the most zealous enforcer. The fight for a simple ramp was about to become a fight for much more. The rest of that Tuesday was a grim testament to Sharon Lee's callousness. Each time David needed to take Rex out, the simple act became an ordeal. He couldn't expect the aging German Shepherd to manage the 3 concrete steps multiple times a day, not with the visible wince each attempt cost the dog. So David, his own leg throbbing in protest, would brace himself, bend carefully, and lift Rex's solid 70-pound frame. Rex, ever stoic, would endure it, but David saw the discomfort in his eyes, the slight tremor in his old limbs. It was a fresh stab of guilt and anger with every lift. He spent hours on the phone and his laptop. First, meticulously photographing the wreckage from every angle, close-ups of the splintered wood, the empty space where the ramp had stood. He saved copies of Rex's official service animal certification, the letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs detailing his own disability rating, and even a framed photo from 2 years prior Governor Emily Brooks herself, smiling warmly as she pinned a small commemorative medal to Rex's service vest at a ceremony honoring canine companions. That photo, usually a source of quiet pride, now felt like a shield he might soon need. He found the list of HOA board members on the Willow Creek Estates community website. Sharon Lee was listed as vice president and head of the Architectural Review Committee. Of course, she was. He drafted a formal letter, polite but firm, detailing the situation, referencing the ADA and Fair Housing Act, and requesting an immediate review and permission to rebuild the ramp. He attached copies of Rex's certification and a brief medical note about Rex's developing arthritis. He emailed it to the general HOA address and specifically to the listed president, a Mr. Henderson, hoping for a more reasonable ear. The neighborhood, usually alive with the low hum of lawnmowers or kids playing, felt different. Or maybe it was David who was different, hyper-aware of the curtains twitching as he helped Rex outside. The neighbors who suddenly found their hedges fascinating when he looked their way. One neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down, did catch his eye and offer a small, sympathetic smile. She even started to walk over, but then her husband called her from their porch, his voice sharp, and she retreated with an apologetic glance. Fear or apathy, David couldn't tell, but the sense of isolation grew. By Thursday, the only response he'd received was an automated acknowledgement of his email. The fine notice Sharon had promised, however, arrived promptly in the mail, $200 for an unapproved structure, with a stern warning that failure to pay within 30 days would result in further penalties. Tucked into the same envelope was a separate, even more chilling letter, printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by the entire board, including Mr. Henderson. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic stonewalling. Dear Mr. Martinez, it began. The Board of Directors of Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association has reviewed your recent correspondence regarding the removal of an unauthorized structure at your property and your subsequent request to reinstall said structure. The letter went on to state, in no uncertain terms, that his ramp was a clear violation of multiple bylaws, citing sections and subsections he'd never heard of. It dismissed his ADA and FHA claims by stating the HOA was a private entity and the ramp was on common access facing property, subject to aesthetic covenants that superseded individual requests unless there was no other possible ingress-egress, which, they argued, was not the case as he still had his front steps. Rex's status as a service animal was acknowledged with a single dismissive sentence. The association recognizes the status of your animal, but maintains that all structures must adhere to established community guidelines regardless of occupant circumstances where alternatives exist. The cruelest part was the conclusion, your request to rebuild the ramp is therefore denied. Furthermore, any attempt to reconstruct a similar non-compliant structure will result in immediate and significant daily fines and potentially legal action to ensure compliance, the costs of which will be your sole responsibility. The previously issued fine of $200 for the initial violation remains due. David read it 3 times, each reading fueling a colder, harder anger. Alternatives exist. The alternative of him further injuring himself, of Rex suffering, the alternative of them being prisoners in their own home. This wasn't just Sharon Lee anymore. This was the entire board, hiding behind their bylaws, deliberately misinterpreting them to enforce a petty tyranny. They weren't just upholding standards, they were actively choosing to be cruel. He looked at Rex, who was lying at his feet, head resting on his paws, watching David with that uncanny empathy. The dog nudged his hand with his wet nose, as if to say, "It's okay, boss. We've faced worse." And they had. They'd faced IEDs, ambushes, the grinding despair of recovery. This was just a different kind of firefight. One fought with paper and public opinion instead of bullets. They think they can just shut us down. Rex, David said, scratching the dog behind his ears. They think we'll just roll over. He crumpled the HOA's letter in his fist. They don't know who they're dealing with. The twist wasn't just the HOA's formal denial. It was the united front, the veiled threat of further legal action, the complete dismissal of his and Rex's needs. It was the escalation he hadn't entirely expected, the clear message that reason and appeals to decency were useless. They had drawn their line in the sand, a line that reeked of discrimination and arrogance. His mind raced. Legal aid for veterans. That would take time, money he didn't have to spare. Small claims court, again, time-consuming, and the HOA had deeper pockets for lawyers. Then he remembered the local news reporter, Sarah Jenkins, who had done a piece on veteran support services a few months back. She'd seemed genuine, tenacious. He'd kept her card. The HOA wanted to play hardball, hide behind their rules and regulations. David Martinez decided it was time to shine a very bright, very public light on those rules and the people enforcing them. He picked up his phone. Sharon Lee and her board wanted to talk about aesthetics. He was about to show them what truly ugly looked like, the ugly face of discrimination. The fight was no longer just about a ramp. It was about principle. And for a Marine, principle was everything. Sarah Jenkins, a reporter for KCRA3 News, listened intently, her pen flying across her notepad as David recounted the events of the past week. They sat at his small kitchen table, Rex lying patiently by David's chair. The morning sun, usually a welcome sight, now illuminated the stark absence of the ramp outside the window, a constant reminder of the HOA's intransigence. And this is the letter they sent, Sarah asked, carefully taking the crumpled HOA denial from David. Her expression, initially one of professional curiosity, hardened as she read, "Wow. Alternatives exist. They're really something. They are." David agreed, bearing his voice flat. They think because they have bylaws, they can trample over basic human decency, over federal laws designed to protect people like me and animals like Rex. He gestured to the German Shepherd. "This dog saved my life more times than I can count, both in the field and back here. Now he can't even get in and out of his own home without pain because Sharon Lee thinks a simple ramp is an eyesore." Sarah spent nearly 2 hours with David. She photographed Rex's certifications, the governor's commendation, David's VA paperwork, and the damage to where the ramp once stood. She filmed David carefully, painstakingly, lifting Rex up and down the porch steps, capturing the veteran's strained face and the waist's quiet endurance. It was a powerful, unspoken testament to their daily struggle. "I've got to be honest, David," Sarah said, as she packed her equipment. "This has all the hallmarks of a story people will connect with: veteran, hero service dog, and unyielding HOA. It's a potent mix. I'll need to get a statement from Ms. Lee and the HOA board." "Of course. Good luck with that." David grunted. "Sharon Lee doesn't strike me as the type to back down or admit she's wrong." He was right. When Sarah Jenkins approached Sharon Lee later that day, camera crew in tow, on the public sidewalk outside her meticulously manicured home, Sharon was predictably frosty. "This is a private community matter, entirely within the purview of the Homeowners Association's established covenants, conditions, and restrictions," Sharon stated, her voice tight, refusing to look directly at the camera. Mr. Martinez failed to follow procedure. The structure was non-compliant and aesthetically unsuitable. The board's decision is final and in the best interest of maintaining property values for all residents. When pressed about the ADA, reasonable accommodation, and Rex's status as a service animal, Sharon's response was even more chilling. "We are a private entity, and while we respect veterans, rules are rules. No one is above them. This sensationalist approach is unwarranted." She then retreated into her house, the door clicking shut with an air of finality. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news that Friday. Sarah Jenkins had framed it perfectly. Hero betrayed local veteran and his service dog denied accessibility by HOA. It opened with footage of David lifting Rex, intercut with images of Rex's commendation from Governor Brooks, followed by David's quiet, dignified explanation of their needs. Then came Sharon Lee's cold, dismissive statement, which, without the context of her perfectly coiffed appearance and pristine surroundings, sounded even more heartless. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. The news station's Facebook page exploded with comments, thousands of them, overwhelmingly in support of David and Rex, and roundly condemning the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Hashtags like #RampForRex and #SupportVeteran David began trending locally. Veterans groups shared the story, disability advocates weighed in, and animal lovers nationwide expressed their outrage. By Saturday morning, the story had been picked up by several national news outlets online. David's quiet suburban street was suddenly less quiet. Cars drove by slowly, their occupants craning their necks to see his house. The scene of the crime thawing, a small group of local veterans even staged an impromptu, peaceful protest on the sidewalk across from Sharon Lee's house, holding signs that read HOAs, heartless over aesthetics and honor Rex, build the ramp Sharon Lee and the HOA board. However, doubled down. They released another statement, this time more defensive. accusing the media of a biased and manipulative portrayal and reiterating their stance on bylaw adherence. They even subtly threatened legal action against the news station for defamation. But they hadn't counted on one particular viewer, Governor Emily Brooks. The governor, a staunch advocate for veterans' affairs, had a personal connection to the story. She remembered Rex. She remembered David. The image of the decorated service dog being denied basic access, and the veteran who relied on him being treated with such disdain by his own community leadership, struck a deep chord. Monday morning, David received an unexpected phone call. "Mr. Martinez, this is Amelia Hayes from Governor Brooks' office." David, who had been steeling himself for another round of HOA notices or perhaps even a legal summons, was momentarily speechless. Yes, the governor saw the news story about you and Rex. She's very concerned and frankly, quite dismayed by the situation. She remembers meeting Rex and holds both of you in high regard." David felt a surge of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in days. Hope. I appreciate that, ma'am. Governor Brooks would like to make a public statement in support of you and Rex. She also believes the HOA's interpretation of the Fair Housing Act and ADA regulations in this instance is questionable, to say the least. She's asked her legal team to review the matter and to reach out to the HOA board directly. A shift in power. It was palpable. The HOA could stonewall a lone veteran. They could try to intimidate a local news station, but taking on the governor of California, that was a different league entirely. Furthermore, Ms. Hayes continued, her voice warm, "A number of local businesses and a veterans construction guild have contacted our office, offering to rebuild Rex's ramp, free of charge, to full ADA compliance, as soon as the HOA grants permission." Or, she added, a hint of steel in her tone, "as soon as they are compelled to." David sank into his chair, the phone still pressed to his ear. Rex, sensing the change in his demeanor, came over and rested his head on David's knee. For the first time since he'd seen the splintered wood, David felt the tight knot of anger and frustration in his chest begin to loosen. The resistance was no longer just his. It had a powerful new ally. The hidden truth, perhaps, was that decency, when amplified, could indeed challenge entrenched arrogance. Sharon Lee might have her bylaws, but David Martinez now had the governor, public opinion, and a wave of community support on his side. The battle for the ramp was far from over, but the tide was definitely turning. The pressure on the Willow Creek Estates HOA escalated with astonishing speed. Governor Brooks' public statement, released later that Monday, was unequivocal. She praised David's service, lauded Rex's heroism, and sharply criticized the HOA's callous and legally dubious actions. She didn't mince words, calling their stance an affront to the principles of compassion and respect that we owe our veterans and those with disabilities. The governor's legal team, as promised, formally contacted the HOA board, outlining potential violations of both state and federal fair housing laws and strongly urging them to reconsider their position immediately to avoid further legal entanglements. The letter hinted at the possibility of the state attorney general's office taking an interest if a resolution wasn't swiftly found. Suddenly, the HOA's defensive wall began to crumble. Phone calls from concerned Willow Creek Estates residents, who had previously remained silent, now flooded the HOA's voicemail in the personal lines of board members. These weren't just calls of support for David. They were calls from homeowners worried about plummeting property values due to the negative national publicity, potential lawsuits draining HOA funds, and the general stain on their community's reputation. The aesthetic standards Sharon Lee had so fiercely defended were now directly threatened by her own inflexibility. By Wednesday morning, less than 48 hours after the governor's intervention, the tone from the HOA had changed dramatically. Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, called David personally. His voice, previously a component of the faceless, bureaucratic stonewall, was now tinged with an almost desperate conciliation. "Mr. Martinez, David," Henderson began, sounding flustered. "There seems to have been a significant misunderstanding regarding your ramp. The board has reconvened, and after further review and, considering new information, we've decided to approve your request to rebuild the ramp for Rex. David listened, saying nothing, letting Henderson stumble through the carefully worded backtrack. We understand now the critical importance of the ramp for your service animals' well-being and your own accessibility. Henderson continued, the words sounding rehearsed. The previous denial was based on an incomplete understanding of the specific circumstances. We deeply regret any distress this situation has caused you and Rex. So the fines are waived, David asked, his voice calm but unyielding. Yes, of course. All fines related to this matter are immediately rescinded. And the removal of the original structure, we understand it was perhaps not handled with the ideal sensitivity. We will be reviewing our contractor's procedures. David almost scoffed. Ideal sensitivity. It had been malicious destruction. And what about Sharon Lee? David pressed. He knew her removal from the board might be too much to expect immediately, but her influence needed to be curtailed. There was a pause. Ms. Lee, Henderson said carefully, has tendered her resignation from her position as vice president and head of the Architectural Review Committee, effective immediately. She cited personal reasons. A small, grim smile touched David's lips. Personal reasons. More like public humiliation and the unbearable weight of being on the losing side of a very public battle. Her reign of petty tyranny, at least in an official capacity, was over. The HOA will also be issuing a formal, public apology to you, Mr. Martinez, and to the entire Willow Creek Estates community for the mishandling of this issue. Henderson rushed on. We want to assure all residents that we are committed to upholding all applicable accessibility laws and fostering an inclusive environment. The hero's rise was quiet, but profound. David hadn't sought fame, only fairness. He had stood his ground, not with aggression, but with the quiet determination of a man who knew what was right. Rex, thumping his tail softly against the floor beside him, as if sensing the victory, was the true hero, the catalyst for this entire stand. The following Saturday was a stark contrast to the week before. Instead of an empty, damaged space, David's front yard was bustling. Volunteers from the Veterans Construction Guild, joined by several local contractors who had seen the news, were expertly and efficiently building a new ramp. This one was wider, sturdier, with a gentler slope and non-slip surfacing, fully ADA compliant, and then some. Sarah Jenkins and her news crew were there, this time to film a story of community triumph. Governor Brooks herself made a brief appearance, shaking David's hand and giving Rex an affectionate scratch behind the ears. This is how it should be. David, the governor said, smiling warmly, communities supporting those who've served, ensuring dignity and access for all. Sharon Lee was nowhere to be seen. Her perfectly kept house across the street had its blinds drawn, a silent testament to her fall from grace. The other neighbors, however, were out. Some brought coffee and donuts for the volunteers. Others simply watched, a few offering David nods of respect, perhaps a touch of shamefaced apology in their eyes for their earlier silence. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor, even brought Rex a new chew toy. As the last screw was tightened and the workers cleared away their tools, Rex, without any prompting, walked slowly but steadily up the new ramp and onto the porch. He turned, looked at David, and gave a soft woof, his tail wagging. David limped up beside him, placing a hand on his loyal companion's head. The simple act of walking up that ramp, unassisted and pain-free for Rex, felt like the greatest victory of all. The HOA issued its public apology, a carefully crafted statement read by Mr. Henderson at a hastily convened community meeting, broadcast on the local news. It was an admission of error, a promise of reform, and a direct apology to David Martinez and the wider community. The villain, Sharon Lee, was relegated to a footnote, her influence shattered. David never wanted a war with the HOA. He just wanted a ramp for his dog, a small measure of dignity. But in fighting for that ramp, he had inadvertently ignited a movement. exposed an injustice, and reminded a community, and perhaps a nation, about the importance of compassion, respect for veterans, and the rights of the disabled. The splintered wood was gone, replaced by a symbol of resilience and collective decency. As the sun set over Sacramento, casting a warm glow on the new ramp, David Martinez knew that sometimes the biggest battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in your own front yard, for the simplest of rights. And with a good dog by your side, anything was possible. David and Rex's unwavering stand against a heartless HOA proved that fighting for dignity and compassion can triumph over petty bureaucracy. Their story is a powerful reminder of the bonds we share and the rights we must protect. Thank you for joining their journey. Please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts on this incredible fight in the comments below.